The silence in the house was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering every familiar sound. Liam had lived with noise for 10 years. The hum of the television Clara always left on, the clatter of her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the melodic chime of her phone announcing a text from her mother. Now there was only the mournful groan of the old house settling and the frantic, hollow beat of his own heart. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks since he had stood by a polished mahogany casket, accepting condolences from people whose names he could not remember, their faces a blur of practiced sympathy. Clara was gone. A sudden, cruel aneurysm had stolen her in the night, leaving a void where his life used to be. Her side of the bed remained untouched, the indentation of her head still a faint shadow on the pillow. Her clothes hung in the closet, their scent a ghostly reminder that taunted him in the lonely hours of the evening. Grief was not a wave, as people said. It was a constant, suffocating pressure, a deep sea dive with no surface in sight. He spent his days wandering from room to room, a ghost in his own home. He would pick up a photograph, a small porcelain bird she had loved, a half-finished book on her nightstand, and feel the loss all over again, a fresh, sharp stab to the chest. But nothing drew his attention more than her phone. It sat on her charging stand, a sleek black rectangle of glass and metal, a portal to a life he was no longer part of. In the first week, he had left it alone, respecting her privacy even in death. In the second, he had picked it up, his thumb hovering over the screen, desperate to see her photos, to read her last messages, to feel some connection to the woman he had lost. But it was locked. A 6-digit passcode stood between him and the last vestiges of his wife. He tried the obvious combinations first. Her birthday, his birthday, their anniversary, the day they met, the day they bought the house. Each attempt was met with the same cold, impersonal rejection, followed by a timeout that felt like a punishment. The phone, once a source of constant connection, had become a silent, mocking monolith. His mother-in-law, Beatrice, had been a storm of calculated sorrow at the funeral. Dressed in impossibly expensive black silk, her face was a mask of tragic matriarchy. Her grief performed for the audience of mourners. She had clung to her son, Julian, Clara's younger brother, a man who wore his arrogance like a well-tailored suit. They had cornered Liam at the reception, held at their sprawling, sterile mansion that always made him feel like an intruder. Beatrice's eyes, cold and sharp, had raked over his simple dark suit, a suit he had bought for his own father's funeral years ago. It was the only one he owned. "Liam," she had said, her voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere like a blade. "We need to discuss arrangements." Julian had smirked, sipping a glass of champagne that probably cost more than Liam's weekly paycheck. "Practicalities, Liam, something you might not be familiar with." Liam, still numb with shock, had simply nodded. He expected to discuss Clara's belongings, her wishes, perhaps a memorial. He was wrong. Beatrice had produced a crisp envelope from her designer handbag. She held it out to him, not with sympathy, but with the detached air of a person settling a debt with a tradesman. "This should help you get back on your feet," she announced, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "A little something to tide you over until you find a new place." He had stared at the envelope, confused. "A new place? Our house." "The house is a family asset, dear," Beatrice said with a cruel little smile. Clara understood that. It was always intended to stay within the bloodline. "We'll give you a month, of course, for appearances." The humiliation was a physical blow. It was as if she had slapped him in the middle of the room. People were watching, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He felt his face flush with a hot, spreading shame. He had been a part of this family for a decade, and in the space of a single sentence, he had been demoted from widower to tenant, from family to charity case. He hadn't taken the envelope. He had simply turned and walked away, the whispers of the guests following him like a swarm of angry bees. He drove home to the house they called a family asset, the house where he and Clara had built a life, and the silence had never felt so hostile. Now, in the third week, his grief was curdling into something else. A cold, hard knot of anger was forming in his stomach. Beatrice's words echoed in his mind, replaying the casual cruelty of his dismissal. And that anger, that deep, burning sense of injustice, was now focused on the small, black phone on the nightstand. He had to get in. It was no longer just about seeing her photos. It was about understanding the woman he had been married to, understanding the family that had cast him aside so easily. He felt, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the answers were inside that device. He sat on the edge of the bed, the phone cool in his palm. He thought back over their years together, searching for a number, a date, a secret code that might have been important only to her. He remembered a story she had told him once, early in their marriage, about her first big success at the investment firm where she worked. She had been so proud, almost giddy. She had landed a major client, a reclusive tech billionaire, and she said the date was seared into her memory as the day her career truly began. He had listened, proud of her ambition, but the specific numbers had faded over time. He closed his eyes, concentrating, trying to pull the memory from the fog of time and sorrow. She had mentioned the month, October, and the year right after they had moved into the house. He remembered the day of the week, a Tuesday, because he had made her favorite dinner to celebrate, and she had arrived home late, buzzing with energy. He pulled up a calendar on his own phone, scrolling back through the years. He found the month, the year. He looked at the Tuesdays. There were 4 of them. He tried the first one. No. The second. No. His frustration mounted. The phone warned him it would be disabled for 5 minutes. The wait was agonizing. He paced the bedroom, the floorboards creaking like an old church door. He looked at a photo of them on the dresser, taken on a holiday years ago. They were both smiling, his arm wrapped around her, the sun warm on their faces. Was any of it real? Or had he been a fool, a placeholder in a life that was never truly his? The 5 minutes passed. He picked up the phone again, his hand trembling slightly. He tried the 3rd Tuesday of that October, 101712, click. The screen unlocked. A wave of relief and dread washed over him in equal measure. He had crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. The home screen appeared, a photo of their golden retriever Buddy, who had passed away 2 years prior. The sight of the happy, panting dog was another small, sharp pain. He swiped through her apps, a familiar landscape of social media, news, and banking icons. He opened her photo gallery first, a desperate need to see her smile again. There were thousands of pictures, holidays, dinners with friends, countless photos of Buddy, and photos of him smiling, unaware. He spent an hour scrolling, the grief returning with a vengeance. He saw the life they had shared, captured in digital squares, but something felt off. In the more recent photos, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a distance in her gaze he hadn't noticed before, a subtle detachment he had probably dismissed as stress from her demanding job. Then he saw it. Tucked away on the last screen of apps, almost hidden among the default programs she never used, was a folder. It was simply labeled in stark white letters against the dark background. If he finds this. His blood ran cold. The name was a direct address. A message from beyond the grave, intended for him and only him. His finger hovered over the icon, a tremor running through his hand. What could be so important, so secret, that it required a folder with such a chilling name? He took a deep breath, the air catching in his throat, and tapped the screen. The folder opened to reveal not apps, but a collection of files, audio recordings, scanned documents, a password-protected PDF, a series of short video clips. Each file was meticulously dated and labeled with a cold, clinical precision that was so unlike the warm, slightly chaotic Clara he thought he knew. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was a secret archive, a hidden history of their life together. He felt a profound sense of violation, as if he were trespassing in the most private corners of her soul, but he couldn't stop. He had to know. He clicked on the first audio file, dated 2 years ago. The file name was Beatrice Call, House Strategy. He put the phone to his ear, his hand cupped around it, as if to contain the sound, to keep the secrets from escaping into the silent room. He heard Clara's voice, clear as day. But it was a version of her he rarely heard, a sharp, businesslike tone. "It's done," she said. "The paperwork is filed." Then Beatrice's voice, smug and triumphant. "And he didn't suspect a thing? The boy's as trusting as a puppy." "He signed where I told him to sign," Clara replied. There was a pause. "He thinks the inheritance is in a joint investment account. He has no idea it all went to the down payment." Liam felt the blood drain from his face. His inheritance. The money his parents had worked their entire lives for, a modest but substantial sum they had left him to secure his future. He had trusted Clara, an investment manager, to handle it wisely. He had signed papers she put in front of him, believing her explanations about portfolios and market growth. "Excellent, darling," Beatrice purred. "And the title? You made sure his name is nowhere on it?" "It's in my name and yours," Clara confirmed. "Just as we planned. If anything ever happens, or if things don't work out, the house is protected. It's a sterling asset." Sterling was Beatrice's maiden name, a name she clung to with a ferocious, aristocratic pride. Liam sank onto the bed, the phone slipping from his suddenly numb fingers. The conversation continued, but he could barely process the words. They were laughing about his trust, his naivety. They had conspired to steal his legacy, the only thing he had left of his parents, and they had done it with his wife as the primary architect of the betrayal. The house, their home, it wasn't his. It had never been his. He was a guest, a long-term tenant in a property purchased with his own money. The casual cruelty of Beatrice at the funeral now made perfect, sickening sense. She wasn't kicking him out of their home. She was removing him from her property. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled to the bathroom and retched, his body convulsing with the violent expulsion of a truth too poisonous to hold inside. The life he had built, the love he had cherished, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed cage built with his own stolen resources. After the sickness passed, he was left with a chilling emptiness. The grief was gone, burned away by the white-hot fire of betrayal. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. The man who had wept at his wife's funeral was gone. The man who had patiently endured years of condescension from her family was gone. He walked back into the bedroom and picked up the phone. His hand was steady now. His purpose was clear. He opened the folder again, his eyes scanning the other files. He had to see it all. He had to know the full depth of the deception. He opened a video file. It was shaky, clearly filmed in secret. It showed a meeting in a lavish office. Clara was there, along with Julian and a man Liam didn't recognize. They were discussing a business venture, one of Julian's many get-rich-quick schemes. "The collateral is solid," the strange man was saying. "The property on Elm Street is valued at well over $2 million. With that backing the loan, the bank won't ask any questions." Elm Street. That was his address. Their address. Julian was using his stolen house as collateral for a business loan. "And Liam remains in the dark?" the man asked. Julian scoffed. "Liam doesn't know how to balance a checkbook. He thinks the house is a magical money pit we all contribute to. He has no idea he paid for the whole thing." They all laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that echoed the phone call between Clara and Beatrice. It was the sound of predators celebrating a successful hunt. Liam felt a strange calm descend upon him. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie, silent landscape of pure, crystalline rage. He was not a victim. He was a man who had been wronged, and the evidence of that crime was now sitting in the palm of his hand. He scrolled through the rest of the files. There were emails detailing the affair Clara was having with a wealthy colleague named Marcus, a man Beatrice and Julian clearly approved of. There were scanned bank statements showing the transfer of his inheritance. There was even a short, chilling audio clip of Beatrice coaching Clara on how to practice forging his signature on a key document. It was a complete, irrefutable record of a long-running conspiracy. But one question remained. Why? Why would Clara document her own treachery so meticulously? Why create this folder, this digital bomb, and leave it behind? He found his answer in the last file, the password-protected PDF. The file was named Leverage. He tried a few passwords, but then guessed the name of the man from the video, Marcus. It opened. It was a draft of a legal document, a separation agreement. Clara had been planning to leave him. The document was heavily weighted in her favor, citing the house as her sole property and demanding alimony. But the final pages contained a shocking twist. She had also been documenting the fraud committed by Julian and her mother. She had records of Julian's shady business dealings, evidence that he was using the house as collateral for loans he had no intention of repaying. She had recorded Beatrice admitting to tax evasion. It was a web of mutual destruction. Clara had stolen from him, but she was also building a case against her own family. The folder wasn't a confession, it was an arsenal. She was planning to use her family's crimes as leverage against them in her divorce, to ensure they couldn't touch her share of the assets she had stolen from Liam. She was playing a dangerous game with everyone in her life. And then the aneurysm, a random biological event that had stopped all the players in their tracks and left the entire arsenal in the hands of the one person they had all underestimated. The trusting puppy, the fool who didn't know how to balance a checkbook. Liam closed the file. He leaned back against the headboard, the phone feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He understood everything now. He was not just a victim of his wife's infidelity or his in-laws' greed. He was the central, unwitting pawn in a war of vipers. Each of them had been planning to betray the others, and all of them had built their plans on a foundation of his stolen money and his broken trust. He thought of his parents, his father, a carpenter, who had taught him the value of honest work and the importance of building things that last, his mother, a nurse, who had taught him compassion and kindness. They had saved their entire lives to give him a head start, a foundation of security. And this family, the Sterlings, had spit on that legacy. They had used it as their personal slush fund, laughing at him the entire time. The cold calm inside him solidified into something new. It was a quiet, unshakable resolve. They had thought he was weak. They had mistaken his kindness for stupidity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. He spent the rest of the night meticulously copying every file from Clara's phone onto a new, encrypted hard drive. He made multiple backups, storing one in a safe deposit box and sending another to a secure cloud server. He then wiped Clara's phone completely, restoring it to factory settings. The arsenal was now his, and his alone. The next morning, he made a phone call. It was to a name he hadn't spoken in years, Arthur Vance. They had grown up together, two kids from the wrong side of the tracks who had sworn to always have each other's backs. While Liam had followed his father into the trades, Arthur had clawed his way through law school on scholarships and grit. He was now a partner at a top litigation firm in the city, known for being a shark, a brilliant and utterly ruthless legal mind. "Liam, is that you?" Arthur's voice was warm, unchanged by time and success. "It's been too long, man.
I was so sorry to hear about Clara." "Arthur," Liam said, his own voice sounding hollow and strange to his ears. "I need your help. I need a lawyer. Not a friend who's a lawyer. I need the best, most vicious litigator you can be." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Arthur's tone shifted, becoming sharp and focused. "What happened?" "I'll tell you everything," Liam said. "But not over the phone. Can you meet me?" They met that afternoon in a quiet, secluded corner of a city park. Liam laid out the entire story, from the years of subtle condescension to the brutal humiliation at the funeral to the devastating contents of the folder on Clara's phone. He spoke calmly, his voice devoid of emotion, presenting the facts with the precision of a detective giving a report. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. When Liam finished, Arthur was silent for a full minute, his jaw tight with a controlled fury.
"They didn't just rob you, Liam," he said finally, his voice a low growl. "They desecrated the memory of your parents. They built their entire world on a lie, and you were the foundation." "I want it all back, Arthur," Liam said, his gaze steady. "The house, the money, every single penny they stole from me. And I want them to pay for what they did, not just with money. I want them to lose everything, the way I did." A slow, cold smile spread across Arthur's face. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught the scent of blood. "Liam, we're not just going to get it all back. We're going to dismantle them. We'll use their own greed, their own arrogance, as the tools of their destruction. By the time we're done, the name Sterling will be synonymous with fraud and disgrace." The plan they devised was not a frontal assault. It was a campaign of 1,000 cuts, a surgical dismantling of the Sterling Empire. It began not with a lawsuit, but with an anonymous tip. Arthur, through a series of intermediaries, sent a carefully worded email to the compliance department of the bank that held the loan on the house. The email raised questions about the legitimacy of the title and hinted at potential signature forgery on the loan application documents. It was just enough to trigger a mandatory internal audit. A week later, Liam received a certified letter. It was a formal eviction notice from Beatrice's lawyer, giving him 30 days to vacate the premises. He read it, a flicker of the old pain surfacing, but he pushed it down. He was a different man now. He placed the letter on his mantelpiece, a reminder of the stakes, a fuel for the fire that now burned within him. He played the part of the defeated victim perfectly. When Beatrice called, her voice dripping with false sympathy, he sounded broken and lost. "I just don't know what to do, Beatrice," he mumbled into the phone. "I don't have anywhere to go." "You'll find a way, Liam," she said, the satisfaction in her voice barely concealed. "You're a resourceful man. Julian and I will be by next week to start taking inventory of the house's contents. We'll be selling the property, you see. The market is just too good to pass up." "Of course," he said meekly. "I understand." He hung up the phone and a grim smile touched his lips. They were walking right into the trap. The first domino fell on a Tuesday. Beatrice was at her country club, holding court with a group of women whose friendships were based on mutual financial advantage. Her phone buzzed with an alert from her bank. She glanced at it, expecting a deposit notification. Instead, it was a fraud alert. Her primary checking account had been frozen pending an internal investigation. She frowned, annoyed at the inconvenience. She tried to pay for her lunch with her Platinum credit card. It was declined. A second card was also declined. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up her neck as her friends watched, their eyes wide with poorly disguised glee. She was forced to excuse herself, fumbling for the cash in her wallet, a currency she hadn't used in years. Panic began to set in on the drive home. She called her personal banker, a man she had on speed dial, but was put through to a cold, unfamiliar voice in the security department. The representative spoke in clipped, formal tones about a serious inquiry into the collateral on her outstanding loans. When she mentioned the house on Elm Street, the representative's voice became even colder. Meanwhile, the second domino was teetering. Arthur had forwarded the evidence of Julian's business fraud to a contact at the IRS. The tip, combined with the bank's internal audit, which flagged Julian as a co-signer on the fraudulent house loan, triggered a full-scale federal investigation into his network of shell corporations. Julian was in his gleaming downtown office trying to placate a nervous investor when two men in dark suits walked in. They didn't speak loudly, they didn't make a scene, they simply identified themselves as federal agents and informed him that his business records were being seized and he was to accompany them for questioning. The news of Julian's arrest spread through their social circle like wildfire. It was a delicious scandal, a satisfying crack in the flawless facade of the Sterling family. Phones buzzed with gossip. Friendships that had been cultivated over decades evaporated in a matter of hours. The invitations stopped coming, the calls went unanswered. Beatrice was in a full-blown panic. Her accounts were frozen. Her son was in federal custody. Her lawyer, the same crooked one who had helped orchestrate the fraud, was suddenly unreachable, his office line disconnected. She was isolated, cut off from the network of power and influence she had so carefully built. Desperate, she drove to the house on Elm Street. She found Liam in the front yard, calmly packing some of his personal belongings into boxes. He looked up as her luxury sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. "Liam!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with hysteria. "What is happening? My accounts are frozen. They've arrested Julian. This has something to do with you, doesn't it? What did you do?" Liam looked at her, his expression one of mild confusion. "Beatrice, what are you talking about? I'm just packing like you asked. I wouldn't want to be in the way when you show the house to buyers." His calm, reasonable demeanor seemed to infuriate her even more. She saw weakness, not cunning. "Don't play dumb with me!" she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "This is some pathetic attempt at revenge. You're trying to ruin us." "Ruin you," Liam said, his voice quiet, but carrying a new weight, a new authority. "Beatrice, how could I possibly ruin you? I'm just a simple carpenter, a man who doesn't even know how to balance a checkbook. Remember?" He quoted Julian's words back to her, and for the first time a flicker of genuine fear appeared in her eyes. The mask of superiority slipped, revealing the terrified, grasping woman beneath. She stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time and realizing she had made a terrible, terrible mistake. She backed away, stumbling back to her car, and sped off. Liam watched her go, a cold satisfaction settling over him. The cascade had begun, and he was going to watch every single piece of their rotten empire come crashing down. The final confrontation was not a dramatic courtroom scene. It was something far more sterile and humiliating. A court-mandated mediation session held in a soulless conference room at Arthur's law firm. Beatrice and Julian sat on one side of the polished mahogany table. They were shadows of their former selves. Beatrice's expensive clothes hung on her shrunken frame, her face pale and drawn. Julian was out on bail, his tailored suit replaced by a cheap, off-the-rack one. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. Liam and Arthur sat opposite them. Liam was in a new suit, one that fit him perfectly. He was calm, his posture relaxed, but radiating a quiet power. He was no longer the grieving, downtrodden man they had dismissed. He was the architect of their ruin. A mediator, a tired-looking man in his 60s, droned on about finding a mutually agreeable solution. Beatrice finally snapped. "A solution?" she hissed, her voice cracking. "He's destroyed us. He's taken everything. My son is facing prison. Our name is mud."
All because he couldn't accept that my daughter was meant for better things. She launched into a venomous tirade, blaming Liam for everything. For Clara's unhappiness, for his own lack of ambition, for the financial ruin he had brought down upon them. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reframe herself as the victim. Liam listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving with sobs of self-pity, he leaned forward slightly. The room fell silent. "You're wrong, Beatrice," he said, his voice calm and even. "I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourselves. You just used my money to do it." He turned his gaze to Julian. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was dirt under your shoe, something you had to wipe off before entering a room. You mocked my job, my background, my intelligence." Then he looked directly at Beatrice, his eyes as cold and hard as steel. "And you treated me like an inconvenience, a temporary stain on your perfect family name. You smiled at my face while you conspired with my wife to steal the only thing my parents ever left me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. "You spent a decade living a lie. You lived in a beautiful house, drove expensive cars, and held your heads high in society. But what you didn't know, what you were too arrogant to ever consider, was that you were living off the legacy of a simple carpenter and a humble nurse, the very people you would have sneered at." Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, to offer another denial, but Arthur cut her off. He placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Beatrice's own voice filled the room, smug and cruel. "And he didn't suspect a thing. The boy is as trusting as a puppy." The sound of her own treachery, her own voice mocking the man she had just minutes ago been accusing, was the final blow. Something inside Beatrice shattered. A raw, animalistic scream tore from her throat. She lunged across the table, her hands clawing, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You bastard, you'll pay for this." Arthur's associate, a large, imposing man, easily restrained her. She thrashed and sobbed, a complete and total breakdown in the sterile, air-conditioned conference room. Her dignity, the one thing she had prized above all else, was gone, stripped away and left in tatters on the floor. Julian just sat there, staring blankly at the polished table, a man already serving a life sentence in a prison of his own making. Liam stood up. He looked down at the wreckage of the Sterling family, not with triumph, not even with hatred, but with a profound and weary pity. They were small, pathetic people, undone by their own bottomless greed. "It's over," he said quietly to Arthur. And with that he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the screams and the sobs behind. He didn't look back. The past was finally where it belonged. In the end, the justice was swift
and absolute. Beatrice, facing overwhelming evidence of fraud and conspiracy, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in a federal prison. All her remaining assets were seized to pay off the mountain of debt she and Julian had accrued. She lost the mansion, the country club membership, the social standing. She lost everything that had ever defined her. Julian received a much harsher sentence. His business fraud was extensive, and he was sentenced to 15 years. He would be a middle-aged man before he saw the outside world again, stripped of his youth, his wealth, and his arrogance. The crooked family lawyer was disbarred and faced his own set of criminal charges. Liam got the house back. The title was cleared and returned to its rightful owner. The first thing he did was put it on the market. There were too many ghosts in those rooms, too many memories tainted by betrayal. He couldn't live there anymore. The sale of the house, combined with the restitution ordered by the court, returned his inheritance to him, multiplied several times over. He was, by any measure, a wealthy man, but the money meant little to him. It was the principle, the reclamation of his parents' legacy, that mattered. He did not buy a mansion or a sports car. He continued to live in his small, rented apartment, finding comfort in its simplicity. He took a year off from work, a year to heal and to figure out what came next. He traveled not to lavish resorts, but to quiet places with mountains and oceans, places where he could feel small and the world could feel big again. When he returned, he knew what he had to do. He used the bulk of his inheritance to establish the David and Mary Miller Foundation, named after his parents. He bought an old warehouse on the industrial side of town and converted it into a state-of-the-art vocational training center. The Miller Center offered free training to young men and women who wanted to learn a trade: carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, welding. It was a place where the value of honest work, of building something real and lasting with your own 2 hands, was celebrated. It was a tribute to his father and a way to turn the poisoned money into something good. A year after the center opened, it was thriving. The sounds of saws and hammers filled the air, a symphony of creation. Liam was there every day, not as a wealthy benefactor in a suit, but as a teacher in a dusty t-shirt and work boots, his hands calloused once more. He found a peace in the work, a purpose that had been missing for so long. One afternoon, as he was showing a young apprentice how to make a perfect dovetail joint, a woman approached him. Her name was Evelyn, the center's administrator. She had a kind face and eyes that held a quiet intelligence. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," she said, handing him a folder. She also held out a steaming mug. "And I brought you some coffee. You look like you could use it." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn. You're a lifesaver." Their hands brushed as he took the mug, and for the first time since Clara's death, he felt a spark, not of passion, but of something quieter, more profound, a spark of connection, of warmth, of a possible future. He watched her walk back to her office, and he felt a sense of profound contentment. He had faced the darkest betrayal and had not let it break him. He had taken the ruins of his past and had built something new and beautiful from them. True wealth, he had learned, was not measured in dollars or in the size of your house. It was measured in the integrity of your character, the honor you show to those you love, and the legacy of goodness you leave behind. The Sterlings had been bankrupt long before they ever lost their money. Liam, in losing everything, had finally found what was truly valuable. And his new life, built on a foundation of truth and purpose, was just beginning.